So we start putting those together, what's my number one idea of, wait a minute, where's my higher risk of victimization? It's if I'm poor and I live in a high population density environment.
I use Throom targets on the range for all the benefits of steel with none of the drawbacks. They're made in the USA too. Pick up a set to make your shooting more fun and effective.
Now this is not offenders, this is victims. So when we say where's our biggest problem of violent victimization, is that if you are living in an urban environment of a high population density, you're more likely to be victimized by violent crime. Now let's talk about who is more likely to live in a high population density environment. Ethnic minorities, people of color. Why? Because of the history of America. We can talk through all that stuff all we want, but you got to ask the question, what's the population density of where I live? That's a risk factor to me. And these are the numbers. Now that's not to say if you go, well, gosh, I'm white, so what does that mean? Well, thank God. Okay, I'm not, I'm black, what does that mean? It means that there's a risk factor there. I think we can control the risk factor for other stuff though, and I'll show you how, because you're not in control of that, right? That's like I say, well, wait a minute, the reality is men and women are victimized about the same as a number because dudes like to beat the crap out of each other. And you're like, well, okay, it's 2022. But as a general rule, okay, you're not gonna change that. All right, I'm a man, you're a woman, you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm more likely to be victimized. That's true, you're not gonna change that. But are there some things that you can recognize that and control for the victimization status and the risk? You can, so let's talk about that a little bit. Let's do some more, we're not quite done yet. Here's the bigger one. This number 5, the prevalence comparison of serious violence among persons less than 35 years old. Okay, so they just controlled at 35. By household income and type of residential location. There's a lot here. So here's what we're looking at. We're looking at people who live in an urban environment, so like a major metropolitan city with a high population density, a suburban environment, less population density, and a rural environment. And this number that goes up is violent victimization. And then of course, what this is controlled for now is income. So the far left is people that make less than 25,000, then 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and 75,000 or more. Do you see a pattern here? Whichever one I live in, who is most likely to be the victim of violent crime? Poverty. Poverty by the longest shot. Do you notice here that somebody who lives in a rural environment who's like half as likely to be a victim of violence is still more likely than a rich person in an urban environment? That's just what the numbers say. So we start putting those together, what's my number one idea of, wait a minute, where's my higher risk of victimization? It's if I'm poor and I live in a high population density environment. That's just the truth of the matter. If I'm poor and I live in public housing, which is a high population density environment, I have everything I need here. Now, who overwhelmingly is poor and lives in high population density environments? Minorities, peoples of color. Why? Go back to Jim Crow laws. I can tell you unequivocally why that happens. I'm not even politicizing here. That after the ending of slavery, black Americans were herded into neighborhoods that they couldn't escape. They weren't allowed to buy homes outside of. If you go to Detroit in the turn of the 20th century, the guy that ran the hospital in Detroit was not allowed to buy a home among white people because he was black, even though he made more money than all of them. They literally came in and tried to burn his house down that he bought because he's black. Why? Because he was only allowed to buy a house in the black neighborhood. So then that became the projects. That became, oh, we get this great idea that, we'll provide housing for these displaced people who left the plantations and slavery. And what we did is we put them in high population density environments and we didn't give them any job opportunities, so we made them poor. And what happens when we get high population densities and high poverty? Huge violent crime. So here's the absolute true part. When somebody says to me, they say, John, wait a minute, it seems when I look at some of these statistics that black Americans commit violent crimes at higher rates. I go, control for poverty and population density. I don't know how to do that. Ta-da, I just did it for you. And when we do that, guess what we find? Humans are human. So now then you say, well, wait a minute, how do you then get out of poverty? Or how do you stop being, a victim of violent crime? Well, stop being poor. You're like, well, it's not that easy. I totally agree. I totally agree. But let's keep looking again. So statistics. I just want to show you this. This is from the FBI crime report. I'm going to read you some of this. I'm not expecting your vision to be this good. You can go download this too, okay? Persons in poor households at or below the federal poverty level, 39.8 per 1,000, had more than double the rate of violent victimization as persons in high-income households. Twice as much violent crime in people in poor households. Persons in poor households had a higher rate of violence involving a firearm compared to persons above the poverty line. Okay? The overall pattern of poor persons having the highest rates of violent victimizations was consistent for both whites and blacks. However, the rate of violent victimizations for Hispanics did not vary across poverty level. Why? I don't know. That would involve a little bit more study, in my opinion. But white Americans and black Americans is pretty clear. Your victimization status is absolutely correlated to your income level. Hispanics, they couldn't find that correlation. I don't know why. Okay? Poor Hispanics had lower rates of violence compared to poor whites and poor blacks. Lord goes, my people. Okay? Next one, poor persons living in urban areas had violent victimization rates similar to poor persons living in rural areas, which tells me there's a stronger correlation to poverty level, to income level, than there is to population density. Population density means we bump up against each other more often. Poverty puts a mindset. And poor urban blacks had rates of violence similar to poor urban whites. So we had, again, 51.3 to 56.3. So when we start controlling for things, what's our big problem here? When we start to look at the actual data, it's about poverty. Now, I'm not trying to give you a social vision for America. I'm just trying to tell you where your risk factors are. That's all I'm trying to tell you. What are my risk factors and what do I do about them? Let's look at a couple more. Here's another one I want you to recognize. So we have on this one to the left, the race of a victim in homicide. Okay, these are homicides. And across the top, the race of the offender. And then on the right side, the sex of the offender. And we have the sex of the victim on the bottom. Okay, so we have race and gender stuff here. And here's what we find. Let's look at white Americans at the very top. White Americans had, for this year, I think this was 2017, 3,300 murders, and the race of the offender was white 2,600 times. So if you're a white person and you die by murder, who is most likely to kill you? A white person. If we go down to the next one, black or African American, 2,900 murders, and of those black or African American offenders, 2,600 times. So if you're a black American and you are murdered, who are you most likely to be murdered by? Black American. Okay, so now we go others and unknown. Okay, so now we have around 330 murders and the others and unknown in there that gets a little bit muddy because we don't know exactly where the stuff is and where there's a little noise in there, okay? Now, if we think about this, if you are male, 4,600 murders, how many of those got killed by men? See on the bottom right? 4,000 out of 4,600. So if you're a man, and you get killed, guess who you get killed by? Another man. Women, 1,900 murders. How many of them were killed by men? 1,700. This is the only anti-correlation of all of these. So this tells me something. My wife probably not going to kill me. It's a good thing. Why? Because she's Hispanic. So she's not a white guy like me, and she's not a man. So I'm probably not going to die at the hands of my wife. This is a very good thing. I like this. However, what does this start to tell me about what my likely challenges are? Well, I just want to be honest with you about some of those. I think that sometimes we're getting fed a narrative in particular that you got to watch out for somebody that's not like you. Are we getting some of that? We got to watch out for the other. I think that is actually part of a really old racism in America. Look out for the others because they're who are the problem. They're not. If you're going to be a violent, a victim of murder, it's almost certainly a man of your own race who kills you. That's just the reality of things. Now, should that happen? No, it's actually very rare in America that happens. Got a little bit more. I know I'm frustrating all of you. We're going to get to the end of that and what it means and then take a break, I promise. A little bit more. Now, this is a tiny one that you're not going to be able to even see the numbers on. You can all gather around here if you'd like. Again, so here's what we see. Total demographics here. The thing that I want you to notice is our victim demographics. There's a gender here, male and female. And females have just a slightly higher rate of victimization than males, but not as much as you'd think. We tend to think women get victimized by violent crime a lot more than men. Well, not in reality. The other part of that, though, remember how we hear that statistics never lie, but liars use statistics? You ever heard that? Or you heard Benjamin Disraeli say there's three kinds of lies. There's damn lies, and there's statistics. That sometimes gets attributed to Mark Twain. It's not a Twainism, it's Benjamin Disraeli. Of course, this is reported violent victimizations. Reported. And here's where the number lies, and I want to tell you where it lies and give you some data on it. Is if you look down here, so we've got here by the gender, by their race, and here's the one that I want you to see out of this though, is that there's on the second from the bottom is marital status. And now this is regardless of male and female on this one. My violent victimizations, if I look over in 2017, never married people had a victimization of 31.2. So this is people 12 and up, 12 and older, never married, 31.2. Married, 11.1. Widowed, 11.5. Divorced, 29.0. Separated, 48.3. So that statistic tells me when's a dangerous time. What is the least dangerous time? Married people have rates of violent victimization a third the rate of people who are single. And that's less than people who are separated or divorced.